Yes, we are live now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 23rd episode of Let's Talk Inclusion. My name is Manobina Chakraborty. I'm the founder of I for Inclusion and an inclusive education consultant based in India. And my guest today is an inclusive education expert practicing in South Africa, and she is Ms. Penny Meyer. Hello, Penny. Welcome to Let's Talk Inclusion.
Hello, Manobina, and thank you very much for having me on your show.
Thank you
It's
for
a privilege
coming.
to be here.
So, we are going to talk about Universal Design for Learning, UDL. But before that, Penny, may I request you to tell our viewers a little more about yourself, please?
Yes. So I started in education very late. It's almost my second career. And I fell into education quite by mistake, in that the company I was working for were looking for volunteers to help adults learn to read. And I loved it right from the beginning. Teaching people how to do something that I had always taken for granted my whole life. And it was when I realized that not everybody had the same experiences and the same opportunities. And I left my previous career as an accountant, and I retrained and reskilled as an educator. Always with the passion of making education accessible and available to everybody. I think it's a human right for everybody to have good education. And then I left South Africa for a while and moved to the Republic of Ireland, and I learned how inclusive they are there, and was fortunate enough to spend 10 years in the education system there, learning a lot about inclusive education. I think Ireland, they feel they still have a long way to go, but from what I was coming from, they were way ahead of what we had here in South Africa. And so those 10 years of working experience, I was very fortunate to bring back to South Africa. And that's what we've been doing over the last 7 and 8 years that I've been back in South Africa, been able to put inclusive education systems in place in the country here.
That's amazing. That's amazing to know, Penny. And thank you very much for being my guest today. I'm interested to know how inclusive are the schools and colleges in South Africa now?
So in South Africa, we signed up in 1996. We signed up to the Salamanca Statement along with many other countries. And then we put Education White Paper 6 in place in 2001, so 20 years ago today. And we've come away, but we haven't come along consistently in all parts of the country and in all parts of the school. And I think that's where our system is failing, because the framework of Education White Paper 6 is very good. And it's based on social justice and addressing some of the inequities of the past, the apartheid era in education, and making sure that everybody has access to education, and a lot of people who didn't in the past. But I'm so passionate that I like to push forward, and I want to see that everybody gets that. That everybody has the right. People with disabilities, people who are impoverished, and people who have learning disorders. That we can make education accessible to everybody.
True, very, very true, I must say. When something is, since our topic is universal design for learning today, so I was just thinking about it. When something is universal, it applies to everyone. So when we hear the term universal design for learning, we imagine it as a blanket format that covers all students. But is that really what UDL is all about? You are an expert of the subject, so it would be helpful if you could tell us about the principles of UDL.
So the underlying ethos, if you want to call it that, of universal design for learning is to create flexibility within the way that we present our lessons, the way flexibility in the experience that we offer our students, and flexibility in the way that they are able to respond and show us what their learning experience was. So yes, we do attempt to include all students in the universal design for learning concept. We do.
When you talk about flexibility, that means that one size fits all program is no longer there, right? So, what is it actually? If you could just tell us.
I think where the best place to start is that universal design for learning only happens if the teacher really and truly knows the students in his or her classroom. But it is important to remember that universal design for learning does not take place in isolation, that there are other factors that also need to be in place. And it's only one wheel in the whole cog. You know, it's not, we can't have a school that is not an inclusive school and then a teacher practicing universal design for learning in the classroom. It goes beyond that. There are other things that need to be in place before we look at universal design for learning. So if I can show you a slide, is that okay? Can I call it up and show you what I mean by that?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I can't
Okay.
see it. No, I
Can you
can't
see
see
that?
it. No, no, I can't see.
Okay. Still,
Have you clicked on the share option? Yes, I think something has come.
are we there now?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So these are all the factors that need to be in place for universal design for learning to work. And that's important to understand that universal design for learning is part of differentiated instruction. So, you know, we look at our direct methods of instruction, we look at the formative assessments. These are all what we use to get to know our students. So that when we are in the classroom and we're starting to cater to the individual needs of our students, we've already had assessments done, we've attempted interventions, we know how our students respond to those interventions, and we have early identification of any learning barriers already in place. So that's where we start, and then we look at the universal design for learning. So and when those features are in place, we can then start to think about how we're going to put that in place in our lesson. And so that brings us to the lesson planning. And you can see the first thing that we do, it's a good practice of inclusive education. And we start off with how well we know our students. So we're doing a lesson plan for our students. We will consider universal design for learning, and we will consider the adaptations that we make. That's where the flexibility comes in. And then we go ahead and we identify our learning outcomes. We identify the differentiated instructional approaches that we're going to use. And then we identify how we will allow our students to show us what they know. And there it's very important that we use evidence-based approaches. And we're going to use some examples later on of what kind of approaches we use at any of three of those different times, whether it's with the outcomes, with the instruction that we give, or with how they give us a representation of what they've learned.
Okay.
Okay. Right, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go on to the next slide, and then we can start talking. And please feel free to stop me at any time if you would like me to elaborate on any of the concepts that we raise.
Sure.
Okay.
I have just only one question. Suppose in a classroom we have 20 students, and 15 of
Yes,
them are average or regular students, and 5 of them
yes,
have some or the other additional learning needs. So,
yes.
how could we design our curricula, or how can we adapt this universal design for learning as a pedagogy to cater to the
Yes.
needs of every child in the classroom?
Well, that's a very good question, and teachers often ask that. But I am of the firm belief that if you cater for the needs of the child with a learning difference, you're catering to the needs of all the learners in the classroom.
Mhm.
So if you, for example, have a student in your classroom who has central auditory processing disorder and has a difficulty listening, and
Yeah.
so you are breaking your lesson down into smaller chunks to allow him or her to take in that information, process it in the way that they need to process it before introducing the next concept, all of those students in the class are going to learn. So that is how you're catering to everybody. You might be working at a slower pace, but then in terms of how you enable your students to engage in that lesson, your students who can work faster might be able to do a few more examples, or you can offer them a more challenging exercise to do. Alternatively, they could work in groups and help and assist the children who are working slower. So the way you get your students to engage really is where your flexibility is going to come in.
So, what I gathered from what you have just said is that while the word universal make this seem like a one size fits all program, it is actually the opposite of what UDL stands for. It is basically an adaptive learning program that allows opportunity for all students, isn't it?
It's exactly it. What you're doing as the facilitator in the classroom is to give all students a way to access the curriculum, a way to access the learning. So by knowing what their learning difference is, you then allow the flexibility. So for example, if you are doing a reading comprehension, you might make it that comprehension available in audio format so that the
Yeah.
child with the reading difference then has reading support so that they can then go on and answer the questions. If that child has a form of dyspraxia and their written expression is not the same as the other children in the classroom, you might ask them to give verbal answers instead of written answers. So it's just the flexibility within the class. They all have access to the same learning content, but how you allow them to engage as the teacher and how they express their knowledge as the student and what they've learned is where the flexibility comes in.
Okay, so what is the main goal of universal design for learning then?
For me, the main goal of learning, of universal design for learning, is enabling access to learning, how we
And
enable our students.
yes, and how one can work to achieve it. As a teacher, I'm
Yes,
asking this. Suppose in
yes,
my class, I have children who are on the autistic spectrum as well, and
yes,
they have their own behavioral issues as well as
yes,
other issues and learning issues as well. And there
yes,
are most of the children are of average caliber, and
right,
they do not have other neurological disorders. So, in a
yes,
class with where most of the children are so-called neurotypical, and there are maybe two or three children who are neurodivergent, how can I apply this universal design for learning as a pedagogy
okay,
I adopt?
yes. So, well, for the children who are on the autistic spectrum, to me, in my classrooms, I would start by creating the right learning environment for them.
Okay.
Okay, that the classroom environment is the right learning environment for them, so that they're not going to be overwhelmed. If they are a child who maybe is not going to, for whatever reason, engage in the lesson as it is for the rest of the class, how can I adapt that? Do I need to bring a classroom assistant in to help that child in that particular lesson? Do I
Mhm.
need to look at the sensory environment? Is there going to be too much noise? Do I need to start to bring in the headphones to minimize the auditory sensitivity? It's really looking at how that child is going to engage in that particular lesson and how I can minimize any kind of discomfort in order to get the learning where it needs to be, so that they can engage in that lesson and grasp the concepts. Mm.
And maybe adapting new methodology will help other children in the class to learn better as well. And when I was speaking about UDL, we generally give an example of an automatic door. If you have two legs and two arms, and if they work well, that automatic door was not designed for you. However, if
Yes,
you have hands, if your hands are full of groceries, or maybe you are very tired, exhausted after a day's work, an automatic door is quite useful for you as well. So the
that's
same
right.
idea, I think, applies in the classrooms. While universal design for learning is greatly beneficial for students with learning and attention issues, it is also beneficial for the average or regular students. Don't you think so?
Yes, I do. I do. You know, when we're looking at, we were talking about neurodiversity. So when we look at our our ADHD students in our classrooms, they need downtime. They need those brain breaks, I call them. And so building in rest breaks in the lesson for specifically aimed at those particular children, the other children in the classroom actually benefit from having those brain breaks as well. They get a chance to take their minds off what is going on and then come back refreshed, refocused, and ready to carry on with the rest of the lesson.
Unmute myself first. Yeah. So, all these principles, we talked about some principles, and I have seen your slides as well. Would you like to show some more slides to us? And maybe after that, we'll talk about it. Yeah, it's buffering. Yeah, yes. You have to unmute yourself first. Yes.
Okay, am I back?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, lovely. So we look at support recognition learning, where we provide multiple flexible methods of presentation. We look at supporting strategic learning, which is providing multiple flexible methods of expression. And we look at supporting effective, in other words, how we motivate the students. And that is through how we get them to engage. And absolutely student focused is what we need there. So the universal design for learning allows for the planning of the individual needs of each student in the classroom. Now,
Mhm.
for me, I look at universal design for learning as a tool, and I use it in conjunction with an individual learning plan or an individual education plan. Because at the end of the day, we want to see the student access the curriculum. We want to see appropriate participation in the lesson. And most of all, we want to see our students with learning differences, with disabilities, making academic progress. That's why they're in school. And if they don't make academic progress, motivation becomes harder later on. So we've got to ensure that all of our students have access to the content and the skills of each learning activity that we provide for them. And we do that through the participation. So I'm going to move on to the next slide so that we can talk about some examples. I know examples are really important, how we put all these concepts in place in the classroom. I'm just a little bit worried because I'm not hearing anything. Have I lost contact, comms, or are we still together?
Can
We're
you,
still
can
together.
you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear
Okay,
me now?
perfect. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, so how do we incorporate universal design for learning into our lesson plans? For me, my lesson plan is the beginning and the end of everything that I do. I'm not somebody who can take a lesson off the top of my head. I have too many children that I work with who have individual learning needs, and I need to be very, very conscious of what their needs are when I am planning a lesson to make sure that I meet each and every one of those needs. So I start with the IEP or the RLP that I have for my students, look at the progress I'd like them to make over the course of a term, for example. And then I look at how I'm going to enable the learning. So teachers who incorporate universal design for learning into their lessons know their students very well. We incorporate these design strategies into lessons, takes extra time. And it almost takes me longer to prepare for my lesson than it does to actually present the lesson. But it does ensure that that lesson goes smoothly and that I've almost ironed out every kind of mishap that might happen, give or take a few unpredictable things that happen in the course. As we all know, there are those things that come up in the lesson that we're not expecting. And we often need other support, either colleagues, sometimes classroom assistants, sometimes we need resources. I find in a classroom where there are a number of students with individual learning needs, we need resources. So we might need text-to-speech software, so we need some technology. We might need, for our disabled students, we might need specific support structures to help them cope within a mainstream classroom. So resources are needed. We need the support of management without a doubt. So you can see that universal design for learning does not happen in isolation. It's part of a larger framework. Strategies in the lesson mean that each day instruction looks different, and it really does depend on what our lesson content is and what our learning outcomes are. Excuse me. Okay, so I thought I'd give a few examples of how we can have a flexible presentation, flexible engagement, or a flexible response, which is how our students tell us what they've learned. So in terms of flexible presentation, our students will then have received their information in different ways. If we talk for too long, our students with auditory difficulties are going to struggle. If we have a video that is too long, our students with visual difficulties are going to struggle. So we have to use almost multi-sensory approach to teaching. And how do we go about doing that? Well, if we're teaching in a traditional lecture format, we must include visuals. And these will support any kind of auditory instruction that we're giving our students. If we're using a video to depict a concept, we should consider using closed captioning so that our students can read as well as listen. And so we're using that multisensory approach there. Another example, we can make our slides. So for example, this particular slide, we could make them available to our students in advance so that they can go through them and focus on listening rather than making notes during the class. They can highlight key concepts so that they actually are coming away from the lesson, not exhausted from learning, but having been able to focus on the exact right concepts that we are trying to teach them during that lesson. More ideas For visual students who are visually strong, but maybe auditorily or orally not that great, we look at concept mapping. We can look at graphic organizers, using small group discussions and peer learning, as well as text-to-speech software, so that students are not, there's not a heavy burden to focus on reading. Those are
What about,
different ways of presenting our lessons.
and what about the assessments?
Yes. Okay, so that is our way of our students responding to our lessons, how we know and get the feedback of how much of the lesson that they have grasped. So that is the third principle, and I'll come to that. That's our means of response. So that's the presentation, how the teacher then discusses and presents a new concept. Then what we want to do, we want to move into the how we get them to engage, because they need to use it. It's the doing part of the lesson. And here, our teachers will use strategies to create the student interest, to get them motivated to engage in that learning experience. Because without the learning experience, just listening to or reading, they're not going to consolidate the concept that they've learned. They need to engage with it first so that we can crystallize that learning. So our examples here, so we could ask them to do project work so that they can take the time they need to take, unlimited time. They don't have to finish something in the classroom. They can elaborate as much as they like. So they have the option of working independently. Sometimes this is nice for our students who are on the autistic spectrum. Working in a group overstimulates, and then they start to get a little anxious. So if they want to work on their own, allow them the option to work independently. They don't feel threatened by the children around them, and they're comfortable. Some children actually work better when they work in groups. It tends to bring out a creativity. There might be an element of competition there, that they can stimulate each other to achieve more. So depending on how that student works best, which is a part of the teacher knowing the student well, we can then decide whether to allow a student to work independently, in pairs, sometimes work with a classroom assistant, or to work in groups. Okay, another example of how we can get our students to learn is to demonstrate to them the relevance of what they are learning. So how does that relate to everyday examples? So if we are doing a maths lesson and we are teaching a concept of money, money comes in and money goes out, allow them to use real money. We could, so that they get the idea that I earn a salary and then I spend it. So money comes in and money goes out. That's a practical way for students to work with money. And we do find sometimes people that our students who battle with the reading for meaning and understanding, when they are using an activity and being practical with it, the concept then is understood much better. And then a third example here is to use hands-on, authentic methods, such as in-person or virtual field trips. I know we can't during COVID now, we can't go on those outings and excursions from school and take them into the forest to learn about how nature, about nature and trees. So we can look at now doing a virtual field trip, taking them through a tour of the Louvre in Paris and seeing all that beautiful artwork. We can look at manipulatives in maths, or we can provide templates and foldables for our students to fill in missing parts where they are not able to actually do a full example on their own. So that's creative ways of getting our students to engage in the learning activity. And then, of course, what's most important at the end of our learning activity is to know how much of what we've taught our students have taken on. And this is with in terms of what I call response, but could be an assessment as well, to assess how effective our learning activity was. So here students can show how effective the learning was in a number of different ways. And here we use alternative expression. We can use physical action and we can use executive functioning. So the example that I used, the first example here, was for our writing tasks to allow the students to use a keyboard and type, especially if they have a form of dysgraphia where maybe, or dyspraxia, where handwriting is untidy, illegible, or perhaps they actually can't get their ideas down on a piece of paper, but having to type is a lot easier for them. We can allow them to use a scribe, so in the form of a verbal answer, and the scribe writes down the answers for them. Another example to know and assess whether our students have grasped our learning concepts is to provide options for them to complete tasks using different media. Now, I had fun the other day in class where I actually said to my students, you decide how you want to show me what you know. And I got WhatsApp messages from my students. I got a rap, a song. One of my students told me what he'd learned in a rap song, and he nailed it. Sometimes, where they're not that expressive, they can use music to tell me how they feel about what they've learned. And sometimes we'll get them to record themselves and send the message on. So we can be flexible. And what I've found is the students, and I'm not, obviously not every single exercise we do with the students is conducive to them deciding how they want to show me how they learn. Sometimes we need more formal structure, but the students, when they knew that they could choose the way they wanted me to get feedback from them, they actually enjoyed that and they felt empowered to be able to express themselves in a way that was meaningful to them. I did get post-it notes as well that day. Awesome lesson, and this is what I learned. Thank you.
So nice.
The third example, I think students know, I think it's really, a lot of this is about trust. When the student feels you know them and you understand them, they will then
Yeah,
start to become, yes, they will then start to see learning as fun, expression of my learning abilities as fun as well.
every
So
student
this,
in the class. Yeah, yeah. Please carry on. Carry on.
So my
Uh,
last example there of how we can get our students to respond to the learning exercise, where we have the more formal assessment, where there is a time limit to what we're going to allow our students to have. We can then look at how can we accommodate them. Will we allow them to use speech to text software? Will we give them an option of text to speech software where they have to read instructions and then give us responses? Do they need tasks? And do they need prompters or classroom assistants or practical assistance for our children with disabilities to be able to give us a response to that learning, especially when it is formal? So we, in South Africa, we call those accommodations. In some countries, I know they're called concessions. In some countries, they're called scaffolding as well. So those are a few examples of how we can look at the three concepts of universal design for learning. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now and come back to you. All right, Manobina, there we go.
yes. So every student in a classroom has their own specific strengths and weaknesses. And by
Absolutely.
applying universal design for learning in the classroom, all students are allowed to take in, digest, and express information in the way which is easiest for them, right?
Yes,
And
and most meaningful. Yes.
exactly, exactly.
Mm.
And it may or may not have to do with any additional learning needs as well, isn't it?
No, no. So this would be our first tier teaching, where we're teaching to the whole class. We're teaching
Okay.
to the whole class, and then that assessment level that we have at the end, where we're getting the feedback from the students, we will
Okay.
know from that feedback, has this individual student completely grasped that knowledge that they'll be able to take it on and apply it at a later stage. If we find there that it doesn't work, if it's the whole class, obviously we need to look at how we presented that lesson. If it's individual students, we will then look at additional support for those particular students. Maybe a bit of revision is required, maybe additional time to actually complete the task. Maybe they didn't have enough time in the engagement section of the lesson, and they need more time to engage before they can grasp the concept fully. And what we want to see is mastering of that concept.
So basically, UDL improves the learning experience for uh, everyone and
For
helps each individual
everybody.
student to expand his or her knowledge of the subject without the constraints of the traditional classroom, what we generally have. So,
Yes.
can we call it an inclusive design rather? Are there any differences between inclusive design and universal design for learning?
I think it is a strategy of inclusive design.
Okay.
Yes, and they are definitely linked. There's no doubt about it. Um, but we can look at differentiated learning as part of inclusive design as well, where we realize what we've been talking about here is children who can access and have the same cognitive ability to be able to cope within that lesson structure. But inclusive design would also then look at a different curriculum for students who
Okay.
maybe are cognitively not able to access the curriculum in the same way other students. So universal design for learning is a part of an inclusive design.
Okay. And I was looking at your LinkedIn highlights where a few of these slides are also available. And you had wonderfully summed up the main points to consider when building UDL, a pedagogy for students with additional learning needs. Would you like to share that slide, or maybe would like if you would like to tell us more about it?
Okay. It's part of this slide now. I just want to. I think I might have skipped it here. So just tell me
Yes.
which one it is, and then I will stop this. It's
Or if you could just explain this to us, I think all the teachers who
okay.
are watching us today, they will be benefited by this.
Okay. Okay. So here I really it was an introduction to universal design for learning. Can you see the slide?
No,
Will
I
I
can't.
let me share the screen again.
Mhm.
Okay. There.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ye-
So this is where I
Yes, we
learning
have seen
principles.
this. Mhm.
Yes. And then this was the second one, which is the one I think I've just gone through now.
Yes,
Yes, that is those are the two that are posted up there on LinkedIn.
yes, yes. It's all right. It's all right. Yes, I think you're mute, Penny.
Can you hear me now?
You're back. You're back. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yes.
So
So
yeah, please carry on.
yes. So in terms of the universal design for learning, if we look at what our children and our students in our classroom are needing from the recognition learning perspective, it is how they can recognize and remember the concepts that we are teaching. And that relates to our method of presentation. When we look at our effective learning, we're looking at creating robust learning experiences that are relevant and will create motivation in our students. And that relates to the methods of engagement, how they are going to interact with the learning material we've presented. And then the last thing, which is the strategic learning, we look at how our students respond to the concepts that they've learned. And those are our methods of expression, how they tell us what they've learned, so that we know, do they need additional learning?
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Penny, for explaining all these things to us. So, universal design for learning can indeed be an incredible tool in the classroom. As we have
Yes.
seen, method can help all students to learn in the way that works best for them. It will also help teachers, as I gathered from what you have said, that it will can also help teachers focus their efforts on the students who need it
Mm.
the most by allowing
Mm.
all students to thrive in an equalized classroom.
That's
So, is
right.
there any other point, Penny, that you might like to discuss?
Yes, I think it's important that we as teachers collaborate a lot in terms of universal design for learning. For me, this concept is it allows a creativity within teaching.
Mhm.
We can be quite creative within the lesson. As long as the planning is there within a lesson, we can respond creatively to the students' needs, understanding what their needs are, especially with the outcomes, how they are going to show us and reflect what they've learned. And I
Mhm.
think as we work through this, if we work as teams and share what we are learning in the classroom with one another, particularly across the same age group, to say, these students responded really well to this type of activity, these students did not respond well, this lesson wasn't successful, because we do have lessons that are not successful, where we realize actually we could have done better at the end. Once we get our feedback from our students, or even in the course of the lesson, we realize we've got to make a change. Something's not quite working, we need to do something differently. I think our successes and our failures within universal design for learning is something that we need to share, because it's big. And within my classroom, I feel like no lesson is the same. Every single lesson is differently. It works differently depending on the makeup of the students in the classroom, how they engage and interact with one another. It depends on the lesson that I'm presenting, the learning concept. And it also depends on what else is going on in the school on that particular day.
Yeah, yeah,
So
true.
so if we share our successes and our failures, and we can learn from one another, and then it's all about having a toolbox with tools in it, and we just put the tools in the toolbox so that when we are in the lesson, we can take, if the lesson's not going well, there's a tool in that toolbox we can take out to make a plan to change the way we're doing something within that lesson. And if we've shared with one another ideas that work and don't work, it just makes learning and teaching that much easier for us.
Thank you very much, Penny. I really had a learning experience today discussing UDL with you. And before we conclude, any concluding advice for teachers from all over the world, Penny?
Um, where we are here in South Africa, we have passionate teachers that really and truly want to enable learning in the classroom. But the feedback that comes from and I think they're amazing, that comes from a lot of the teachers is, but I don't know enough about special needs. I don't know enough about this. I don't know enough about that. And I sometimes get really overwhelmed. It's important that teachers know that they don't have to be specialize in autism. They don't have to specialize in dyslexia. They don't have to specialize in learning difficulties or learning disorders or disabilities. What they just need to do is connect with the students and
Yes.
get to know the students and understand what motivates the students. What do they want for themselves? And what are their fears? And I think that is more important than becoming a specialist in disorders and disabilities.
Yeah, the same thing is here in India as well. And I would like to add here for the teachers that if you have already designed your course, reflect on how it is going. What current course activities, methods of instructions, and assessments are working well? What is your teaching style, and what are your students' learning modalities? Ask
Mm,
yourself which student would likely do well in your class and which students might struggle, and
mm,
then redesign your course if you feel the need. And for that, I also think the same way, Penny, that no one needs to be a special education teacher or a specialist. It's
mm.
how you connect to your students that matters the most.
Yes.
And
It's the
thank you.
trust. Yeah.
It's a trust. It's a trust. Thank you very
Mm.
much, Penny, for this enriching discussion today. And the
You're very
viewers,
welcome.
the teachers, you can send us questions if you have any. Penny and I will be happy to answer your questions. So here is our email ID. If you send me an email, I will forward that email to Penny, or maybe in the comment section, you can post your questions. Penny and I will definitely be happy to help. Thanks a lot, Penny. I look forward to further collaborations with you in the near future. Thank you for
Well,
your
thank
time and
you.
support.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. It's been a pleasure being on the show with you. And yes, I've absolutely loved this time with you. And I'm open to any questions if anybody has them. Happy to
Thank you.
answer them.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
And to my
Okay then.
viewers, thank you. And to my viewers, please keep an eye on our Facebook page for the 24th episode of Let's Talk Inclusion. Hope to see you soon. Till then, goodbye and take care. Penny, thank you very much once again. Bye bye. Bye for now.
Bye bye.